their plan to get Assad out of power, to build a pipeline going through Syria to basically feed natural gas and oil and everything else into Europe is failing, and to place the dollar on their oil reserves is completely failing because of Russia. And since the economy is failing, what they would like to do is provoke a war.
In the 1990s, he created a billion-dollar copper producer. In the 2000s, he launched what would become one of the world's top primary silver producers. And in 2015, he started what he believes will be his third billion-dollar company, attracting shareholders like the Sprott Group, Rick Rule, Doug Casey, and Marin Katusa. This is the one gold stock to research right now. Visit futuremoneytrends.com/investright.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into CrushTheStreet.com. I'm joined with Dave of the X22 Report. He has very popular YouTube channels, two of them actually, X22 Report and the X22 Spotlight, and his website, x22report.com, where you will get everything. And Dave is just one of the most educated people I've listened to that discusses geopolitics and the economy, for that matter. He's well researched across the board. So I'm interested in talking to him today about what is going on in the Middle East. So Dave, thanks so much for taking the time to join me today.
No, thanks for having me.
Dave, big news came out recently. It's been a few weeks now, maybe a month, that Turkey shot down a Russian fighter jet. And the fact is, these countries violate each other's airspace all the time. And so why was it necessary for Turkey to shoot down a Russian plane this time around? Was Turkey just showing their frustrations of the Russian airstrikes in Syria?
Well, I mean, we need a little bit of history before we discuss why the plane was just shot down out of the air. And nothing happens out of nowhere. There's always something that leads up to it, and there's always reasons why they're doing it. And we have to remember, in Syria, the United States, Turkey, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the coalition forces, they've been trying to take out Assad for, let's say it's about 6 years now. And they've had this plan set up for a very long time. They thought they were going to be finished moving into Yemen, Libya, Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and eventually Iran back in 2008. Now we're in 2015. And to get into Syria, they thought they'd do the same exact thing they did with all the other countries, have a color revolution, overthrow the government, and put a puppet government in Syria, but that didn't work out. So they started this civil war where they created the Free Syrian Army, the moderate rebels, which they like to call them, and going forward, this civil war has been going on for 5 years now, and they can't remove Assad. It's completely impossible, and everything they've tried has failed. The false flag with the sarin gas back in 2013, creating the Islamic State in 2014, because they were waiting for the elections to see how Assad did. And of course, in June of 2014, the people of Syria voted Assad back into power. I think it was 89% vote for Assad. And all of a sudden, we had the Islamic State filter into Iraq and into Syria. And they've been telling us that, terrorism, it's terrible. Terrorism, it's going to take a very long time to get them out of Syria. And they've been using this meme for a very long time. And at this point, Russia decided, okay, enough is enough. This is ridiculous. We see what's going on here. We understand what the Islamic State is now. It's the proxy army for the United States government, central bankers, and they're still trying to remove Assad, because when they looked at the satellite information and all the reconnaissance of what has been happening in Syria, they found out that the coalition forces, which were not invited into Syria by the Assad government, and remember, Syria is a sovereign country, they were invaded by the United States, England, Australia, France, and the rest of the Arab nations. Russia realized they're destroying their infrastructure. They're destroying oil refineries, grain silos, power infrastructure. They're hitting civilians. They're actually hitting the Syrian army. They're doing everything they possibly can to help the Islamic State, al-Nusra, al-Qaeda, the Free Syrian Army, and other terrorist groups move closer and closer to Damascus. So Russia came in, they started to bomb the Islamic State, really bomb the Islamic State, and they have so far lost about 14% of their territory, and they're losing ground inside Syria. So at this point, we have the United States, we have England, we have France, we have the other Arab nations flying in the same airspace as Russia. Now, Russia has set up the S-400 missiles. They have a destroyer on the coast ready to hit down anything. So they kind of set up a no-fly zone, and they're monitoring the whole entire area. Now, we have to remember that the economy is not doing as well as the White House and the central bankers want us to believe. The economy is doing much, much worse. The economy is failing. This is why John Kerry came out and said, if we don't make this deal with Iran, the dollar is going to collapse, which he's right in a way. And what he's really saying is, if we didn't get into Iran and set up a central bank and place all their oil on the dollar, yes, the dollar will collapse. This has nothing to do with nuclear. But what is happening right now is their plan to get Assad out of power, to build a pipeline going through Syria to basically feed natural gas and oil and everything else into Europe, is failing, and to place the dollar on their oil reserves is completely failing because of Russia. And since the economy is failing, what they would like to do is provoke a war. And we can see this all across the globe, and this is something that we can see in Eastern Europe, where they're battling in Ukraine. We can see it in the Pacific with China, and we see it in the Middle East with Russia. So they're trying to, poke at Russia, poke at China, and they're hoping that, they'll strike back in some way. Now, Turkey, they have been funneling oil in from Syria and Iraq. The Islamic State is trained, housed in Turkey. Qatar and Saudi Arabia are also included in this, so is Israel. And all the coalition forces, they know what the Islamic State is. They know it's their proxy army that they use. And the United States has not been hitting the oil convoys because this is how they fund the operation in Syria and in Iraq. And to provoke Russia, the United States, along with Turkey, decided, okay, let's take down a Russian plane. And you have to remember, the Russian planes, the bombers, the Su-24s, they were flying without air-to-air missiles. They also had an agreement with the United States for air safety. And as the Russian bombers were flying close to the border of Turkey, destroying Aleppo, destroying the convoy routes, destroying everything in that area, Turkey was getting nervous. They knew that Russia was on to them. And under the instructions of the United States, because there was an AWACS plane in the air at the time, they decided to take out the Russian bomber. And of course, as soon as it came out, they said, oh yes, they were in the Turkish airspace, and from all the satellite feeds and everything, they were not in the Turkish airspace. What Turkey did a couple of months ago, they extended their border 5 miles, and they included that in their safe zone. And basically what that means is they took their border, moved it into Syria, and said, okay, this is our area right now. We're protecting our country, but you just can't do that to another sovereign country. But they decided to do that, and this is how they were using that, the meme that Russia was flying in their airspace, which from all satellite images, they were not. Basically, they shot down the bomber. Putin decided, okay, you want to play this game? We're going to expose you. We're going to expose everything that you're doing. And he exposed the convoy routes. They exposed Turkey housing the Islamic State, training the Islamic State, supporting the Islamic State. And of course, the United States, they were backed in a corner saying, oh yeah, we know nothing about this. But of course, they knew exactly what was going on here. They were all part of it. And at this point, they were hoping that Russia would retaliate in another way, maybe go after Turkey and their planes. But Putin, he doesn't operate in that fashion. He doesn't strike out because he knows what the central bankers want. He knows they're looking to start World War III. And everything that he's been doing, if you look at the actions, and I don't like listening to what they say because they say a lot of different things. If we look at the actions and we go back to 2013, Putin brokered a peace deal at the time the United States wanted to go into Syria and do these bombing runs that we see today. He didn't want this to happen because he knew it would lead to war. In Ukraine, he brokered the Minsk I ceasefire, the Minsk II ceasefire, to stop what is going on here. And as of right now, what peace deals has the United States brokered in all of this? Nothing. The only time they're actually talking about a ceasefire, not peace, a ceasefire in Syria, is when they're losing ground, when they can't win at this point because of Russia, and they know this, so they need a timeout. And this is what we're seeing right now. So everything that the United States, Turkey, and the coalition forces have been trying to do in Syria, it's completely failing, and it's getting worse. And it kind of scares me at this point, because when you back a wild animal in a corner against the wall, they come out with their claws, and we're definitely going to see their claws come out, and most likely we'll see some type of an event.
It really does seem like we're getting to that point where there is going to be an event, and wow, what a great explanation of all of that. So Dave, let's talk about ISIS just a little bit. I know you've already alluded to it, but let's talk about their infrastructure a little more. Exactly where are they getting their assets from? They're the wealthiest terrorist organization ever. Let's talk about where their assets are, how they're receiving their money, how they're growing, how they're able to recruit, and what they're doing as the proxy army.
Okay, we have to remember the Islamic State is a paid mercenary army where the United States, Turkey, the coalition forces, they're paying mercenaries to fight in this war. Most of the Free Syrian Army is also paid mercenaries. Al-Qaeda, paid mercenaries. These are all created by the CIA, MI5, Mossad, and Saudi Arabia, Qatar. Now, back in 2014, up to the point where Assad was going for the elections in June, the United States decided to have a war game type of scenario in Jordan, where they brought in a lot of military assets, a lot of military equipment was brought over just for the training purpose of having these drills. And it's kind of odd that they were doing this back in 2014 at the same time the elections were going on in Syria. And after the elections, what we saw was the Islamic State filter into Iraq. Now, during this time, for 6-8 a year before the elections, they were training these paid mercenaries in Turkey, in Jordan, in Qatar, in Saudi Arabia, and they were prepared and ready to go in June, July, August. And this is when we saw the Islamic State. They just appeared out of nowhere. Well, they didn't appear out of nowhere. They were trained, they were housed, and they were equipped with the weapons they needed. And that all came from the CIA. Now, fast forwarding to this year, there's been many, many reports from the Iraqi government where they spotted British planes, U.S. planes, dropping military assets for the Islamic State. This happened many, many times. It also happened in Syria. They're dropping also food and other supplies. And every time they train the Free Syrian Army, what happens is they immediately defect to the Islamic State. Because you have to remember, this proxy army is kind of a perfect proxy army. It's a terrorist organization. They don't report to any government. The United Nations really can't control them because they're not part of anything. They're terrorists. And they can use them to scare all the nations into doing what they want, and that is to remove Assad. Now, of course, they've been telling us they don't want to remove Assad, but that has been their goal all along. Now, they needed a way to fund the Islamic State, and the poppy fields in Afghanistan, that was not going to do it. They needed more money to fund them, so they had to think of a way to do this. So as soon as the Islamic State, if everyone remembers, came into Iraq, caused chaos in Iraq, the first thing they did was they captured the oil fields and the oil refineries. The same thing happened in Syria. Everywhere the Free Syrian Army was, the Islamic State just moved right in. They captured the oil refineries and the oil fields, and they set up their own type of crude oil refineries to refine the oil. And then, out of nowhere, they had, thousands of oil trucks at their disposal to use to filter this oil and ship it out of Iraq and Syria. Now, these convoys are gigantic. Russia has proven that you can see these convoys from the air with absolutely no problem. And the United States kept on telling us, and it's funny how they knew exactly how much the Islamic State was earning, how much they were growing, where they were getting all this income, but they never could stop it. And then Russia, after the Su-24 bombing, shoot down, they said, okay, you want to play this game? We'll show you how they're being funded, and we will destroy the convoy. And that's what they started to do. They just started to destroy their oil manufacturing, their convoys. They tracked the convoys going right into Turkey. They found all the information they needed, knowing that Bilal, Erdogan's son, was basically the head of the operations. So all this money from the oil was being used to basically fund and keep the Islamic State operational. Because, of course, as you know, the British government, the U.S. government, the Arab countries, how would they explain this, that they were funding the Islamic State? So the money had to come from someplace. And they basically created this whole entire plan. And going forward, all the weapons that are being delivered to the Free Syrian Army, like the TOW anti-tank missiles, all flow right into the hands of the Islamic State. Anything that they need comes from the United States, from England, from Saudi Arabia, from Qatar. And basically, right now, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the United States, because they're losing their battle in Syria, they've been airlifting them out of Syria and moving them into different countries, like Libya, for one. This is why all of a sudden we see a growing presence of the Islamic State in Libya. All of a sudden they have 2,000, 5,000, I think it's up to 8,000 Islamic State soldiers inside of Libya, because they're airlifting them all out of there because they're being destroyed. As we know that Russia, the Syrian armed forces, have taken back Aleppo. They're moving into Deir ez-Zor, and they're pushing the Islamic State further and further east, taking back their territory. And this is a problem. And this is why the United States finally said, okay, we will agree to a ceasefire. This is not peace. This is a timeout, a ceasefire, because they need this to basically regroup, to come up with a new narrative, a new false story of what the Islamic State is about to do. And they're trying to figure it out. And what I think they're planning right now, because Russia basically has a no-fly zone, so they know they can't use the air power in this region, it seems at this point they are training, preparing ground forces to go into Syria. And we see Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Jordan, England, Germany, France, Italy, the United States preparing ground forces to go into Syria. Now, of course, they're going to use the story that they're going after the Islamic State, but again, this is not what they're doing. They're not going after the Islamic State. And they don't really care at this point because they have nothing to lose if they start World War III. If the battles begin with Russia, it makes no difference. If they're on the other side shooting at the United States soldiers, if they're shooting at Italy, if they're shooting at France, if they're shooting at Germany, this will just spark World War III and will be off and running, and it's fine with them because the economy is collapsing. They need a way of diverting everyone's attention off the central bank, off what the U.S. government has done, to another area, and this is what they're planning. Now, if they can't get this spark, they will eventually scare the European people, the people here in the United States, the people in Canada, Australia, into going into war. And they will push this as hard as they possibly can with some type of an event. Because what we see right now is they're getting prepared and ready for something in Ukraine. They're getting prepared and ready for something in the Middle East. And coming in this new year, probably in the first half, we will see something else occur, and they will blame this on the Islamic State. And we'll have to see what this exactly will be. But whatever they do, it's going to have to be something that's huge. That's something that's going to scare people enough to say, yes, we need to go in there. Because you have to remember the legislation for going to war, for fighting the Islamic State, is in Congress. They continually try to get traction with it. After the San Bernardino shooting, they tried to get traction on this legislation, the authorization for war, and they just couldn't. And they need this because in that bill, it allows them to go after the Islamic State in any country. It allows them to bring troops in. It allows them to go after Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, or any other type of terrorist organization in any country, wherever they are. And this is why we see them, in little pockets in all these different countries, because they have to get back into the Middle East. Because right now, in Yemen, in Libya, in Lebanon, the people there are fighting back. They don't want the United States there. The dollar is being removed from the oil reserves. They're not using the dollar, and they cannot have this, because if the petrodollar dies, basically the whole economy will completely fall apart. And this is why we're seeing all of this in the Middle East at this point.
Dave, in your opinion at this moment, who's more equipped to handle actual warfare in this region, and for that matter also an economic warfare, but with shutting down pipelines and sanctions, and between Russia and NATO? What's the dynamic of this in this region at this time? I mean, even the U.S. for that matter.
Well, I think China and Russia actually have the edge. Most of our military equipment doesn't work well, and from what we've been seeing from Russia, their equipment is much more advanced. Their air defense system, their S-400, is very advanced. Their capability of jamming our Aegis destroyers is very advanced. Actually, the USS Donald Cook that was in the Black Sea was completely disabled when a Russian jet flew over, turned on their jamming system. It took the USS Donald Cook completely down, and it had to be towed into port. When we look at their ballistic missiles right now that they're using, they're very accurate. They don't fly in a perfect trajectory. They can maneuver. They can change course at a moment's notice. If something is trying to hit it, it can basically bob and weave and get away from it, compared to what the United States has. And what we're seeing with their jets, their Su-24s and their MiGs, they're much more advanced. Our F-35 doesn't really work. It's kind of a lemon. And China has basically the same type of military assets compared to the United States. And both of those forces going up against the United States, It seems like it's a no-win situation. The Pentagon actually has run many different war games where the United States was fighting Russia and China, and I think they ran like maybe 9 of them or something, or maybe a little bit more. And in every single scenario, the United States lost. So that is not good. And this time, with Russia being in Syria, it reminds us of Russia being in Afghanistan with the United States, and the United States had the edge back then, where they were able to basically grind them down until they couldn't afford that war. Well, we have the same thing now. The United States, the economy is doomed. The debt is so high it cannot be sustained, and Russia is a manufacturing powerhouse along with China. They also have oil distribution. Their economy is not as bad as the United States whatsoever. And if we go into a battle in Syria over a period of time, Russia will grind the United States down and will destroy it, just like the United States did to the Soviet Union back in the days of Afghanistan. So at this point, the United States is on the losing end of all of this, but the warmongers, the central bank, they don't care. They know this. They know that all of this is coming to an end, and they don't want to be blamed for this entire economic collapse because they're looking to reset and start this system over. And remember, the central bank has no allegiance to a country or group. Their allegiance is to themselves. Their allegiance is to debt. Their allegiance is to any country they can take their claws and grip onto and have them do what they want. And basically what they want is to take their currency that they create out of thin air and use it to rebuild, use it to create an armed force, use it to spread across the globe. So they really don't really care who is going to be the winner, who's going to be the loser, because in the end, they know they're going to need their funds to rebuild the cities, rebuild the infrastructure, and going to war, they know they're going to need their funds to fight the wars. So they're happy either way. They make out, and they don't care who is next in line. And as we can see right now, a lot of what is happening is we see economic information. We see what is happening here in the United States. Everything is flowing from the west to the east, and they're duplicating pretty much everything that we've had here. The SWIFT payment system was duplicated out in the east. We see that China has been pushing the yuan, renminbi, to be a reserve currency. The IMF has given it a green light. They've been setting up bilateral trade. We see Zimbabwe is one of the first African countries to take on the yuan as a reserve currency. We see other African nations running out of dollars in their countries, looking to make their move into the yuan. And the only country that has not jumped on board of having some type of clearinghouse or bilateral trade is the United States. But we can see everything is being duplicated out in Russia and China. They're using their own currencies. They're bypassing the dollar. And this is a big problem for the central bankers. They don't want this to happen. They don't want a competing currency because the central bank here in the United States, they want the control. The U.S. government wants the control. And they're hoping when this is all said and done, they think they're going to win the war. They will restart the system, and we'll start this whole process all over again. And that's what they're hoping. And this is why they don't want to be blamed for this entire collapse.
Wow, that's incredible analysis there, Dave. So, Dave, in conclusion, I mean, you've done so much research, and I can imagine your opinion on the refugee crisis might be a little different one way or another based on the facts that you look at. And I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on the people there that are being affected by the mess that is going on, and your thoughts of, you know, where they should be allowed to go or not allowed to go?
Well, the refugee crisis, I mean, I believe that, you know, if there is war and there are refugees, countries should help out. But we have to look at why this is occurring. I mean, this is not something where there's an actual grassroots civil war going on in Syria, or they're in any of the other Middle Eastern countries. The United States went into these countries on purpose to overthrow the governments. And those people who didn't want to live in those countries anymore, they are now refugees. The same thing in Syria. This is not a grassroots civil war. This is the United States coming in with a terrorist group trying to remove the president of a country, to put in a puppet regime. Because of all of this, Turkey has been basically taking in the refugees under the instructions of the United States. So we have refugees from Libya, Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq, and Syria. But there are refugees from Syria, but not as many as they want you to believe. And they've been housing them in Turkey. They're all flowing into Turkey over these years. And eventually, the United States wanted Europe to come into this battle to finally get Assad. So they instructed Turkey to release the refugees into Europe. And they let out millions and millions of these people that they were housing. And they started marching into Europe. And basically, Europe, was taken by surprise. They didn't know what was going on. And all of a sudden, all these people were coming to the country. And they were like, okay, we can't have this. They had the Schengen, where they had open borders. And we can see that's being shut down now. They're erecting fences, trying to keep the refugees out. And all of this was to basically push Europe into the fight. And the people are reacting quite the opposite. Governments are reacting quite the opposite, where they're saying, okay, we don't want these refugees. We don't want to go to war either. And we're just closing our borders. And all these refugees that were being housed in Turkey have no place to go. Of course, the United States said, we will take in the refugees, but this is all part of Obama's agenda. The same thing with the illegals coming over the border. To pump these bubbles up, they need more and more bodies to take out student loans, to take out auto loans, to get the low-paying jobs. And this is why they'll gladly accept all these people coming in, because the corporations, again, are not penalized for these refugees or illegals taking the jobs, because they don't have to get Obamacare, so they can hire these people. They're not penalized at $3,000 per person. And eventually, over time, as these people become citizens here, they can go right onto Obamacare. So it's a perfect scenario for the United States. Well, I should say for the Obama administration. But it doesn't help the people here in the United States whatsoever. And if this was a grassroots civil war problem, everyone would be okay with it. I'd be okay with it, as long as we bring them in, we make sure that, we know who they are, we run background checks and go through all the procedures. But they want to skip all of this. They don't want to do any of this. And we can see at this point that all of this was completely planned. It was part of an agenda. And this is basically their plan. And it's not working either. I mean, everything they're trying, and they'll keep changing their tactics. They'll keep trying all different things until they can get their goal. And no matter what they do, their goal is always to get the country of Syria, to put a new government in, to set up the system where their dollar is being used on their oil reserves, then eventually go into Iran, and then go back into the other countries to basically refortify the puppet governments in there to keep this entire system propped up. But it's just not going to work. We see it's falling apart left and right. Their plans are falling apart left and right. And the only thing that they'll have left is some type of false flag event, and which will basically lead us to war. I mean, that's what they have left.
Wow. All right, Dave. Well, I appreciate your time and sharing your wisdom and knowledge with us here at CrushTheStreet.com. If people want to reach out to you, find more information on you, where would they go and what would they find?
You can go to my YouTube channel, X22 Report. You will find me doing a report Monday through Friday I'll do it on financial and geopolitical. I do one on the weekend. You can also go to the X22 Report Spotlight. I do interviews there with many different people. You can come to the X22report.com site, and you can hear the audio version of what I do. If you're not interested in looking at the video version, and you can see different stories that I post on the website, and I have different tabs and stuff that you can look at. But you can reach everything from my website if you just want to come to the website, and those are the 3 different areas that you can go to.
Dave, thanks so much again for coming on the show.
Ken, thank you very much for having me.